Hello, biology students. We're starting off our new section today, our whole new unit, Unit 10. It's on ecology. Ecology may not be a term that you're familiar with, but a lot of the concepts that we're going to talk about, you've probably heard a little bit before. You've interacted with them. It's not going to be a lot of things that you haven't heard before, or you won't be quick to grasp, all right? So let's just break down a few easy terms, hopefully today, getting used to it. I think there'll be 3 or 4 sections to this unit. We'll do most of them in class. But today we're going to use the video. So please make sure you're filling in your student notes as we go through it. All right, so ecology is the study of the interactions among living things and their surroundings. A lot of times you might actually hear ecology is the study of ecosystems, and we'll know what ecosystems are here in just a minute. Basically, as you can probably put 2 and 2 together here, it's living things and where they live. Okay, so it's the study. I really like focusing on the study of interactions, among these living things and how they interact with each other, and also how they interact with non-living factors or things inside their environments. So it could be what they eat, or the amount of water in their surroundings and how that affects, their survival and also their reproduction. So ecologists study environments at different levels of organization, and that's the primary thing we're going to look at today. So there's a definition of ecology. From a very local, a very small scale to a very large scale, you can study different levels of ecology. Okay, some ecologists could just study one individual organism. And then, of course, hopefully you know by now, an organism is an individual living thing. I like this diagram here. It kind of gives us some reference points. So we can think of this, it looks to be like a reindeer. This one reindeer or an elk, 2 different species, but I can't tell which one's which. So anyway, this individual would be an organism, okay? The individual, one singular elk or reindeer. We can also study ecology at a population level, and this is a group of the same species that live in one given area. So it would be this family, as I'm assuming here. Looks like a male, female, and a young of elk here. So the population is a group of the same species. This is a key difference between this and the next level. All right, so a group of the same species is a population. Now, a lot of times we hear population related to like humans. How many humans live inside of an area? But think about how that term fits. We're counting the number of the same species that lives in one area. So you might could say, what's the population of Wedowee, Alabama? That would give us a group of the same species, humans, that live in this one given area, okay? So if we're looking at wildlife, let's just say, a population, all of them have to be the same species. And remember, species are a group of organisms that can reproduce and have offspring that are fertile, that can reproduce themselves, all right? The key difference in the step up, so if we were an ecologist studying this next level of community, this is a group of different species that live together in one area. Now think about this. There got to be species of living things, but we see numerous ones right here. We see a moose, right? And we see some kind of bobcat looking thing. Down there we see a rabbit, an owl, a beaver, and also trees and different types of grasses in here and some types of shrubs. Those, of course, are living things as well. Sometimes I get in the bad habit of just trying to think of animals because I really like studying animals. But you got to remember all these trees and plants and shrubs and grass, they're living things too. They're organisms, right? Because they're able to survive, they're able to reproduce, they're able to make more young and continue that species. So a community is a group of different species that live together in one area. All right? And step up from there is the ecosystem, okay? And an ecosystem is not only the living things, the plants, the animals, the bacteria. It also includes all these non-living factors, okay? Anything that's not alive in that given area. So we're talking about rocks and water and soil and climate, temperature. All of that affects the ecosystem. Or if we were an ecologist studying an ecosystem, it would have to include all those things. Now, I want to talk about ecosystems a little bit more in depth. When we think of ecosystems, a lot of times we jump into a huge area like the rainforest or the grassland or a desert. But an ecosystem can be very small. It's just got to be a given area that has certain living components and non-living components. Think about if we went for a walk in the woods. Now, the woods itself, we could say this is an ecosystem. Absolutely. Yeah, there's plenty of living things and non-living things. But let's say we found a downed tree or a log that's fallen over, and it's just laying there, been there for a while. If we were to cut that log open or tear it open, more likely, we would see lots of things, right? We would find living things, lots of insects, and maybe even some molds and mosses. Okay, so we got some plants possibly growing out of that tree, and then we also have these insects, plenty of bacteria as well. But there's also non-living components there. The tree becomes a non-living component because it's fallen down. It's no longer living, right? It's becoming kind of the source for food, right? There's going to be water in that area. There's going to be a temperature, a climate that surrounds it. So not only is the forest an ecosystem, we could say that log is an ecosystem all in itself. You'll even hear some people talk about that the human body is an ecosystem because, yes, we are living, but there's bacteria that lives within us. There's water and liquids and things like that. Now, water is not a living thing. This is always a question I like to bring up, and we'll probably talk about it tomorrow in class. But water is not a living thing. The human body has all of these different components, so in itself could be an ecosystem, especially if you were wanting to study some type of bacteria that maybe lives in the gut of humans. Okay, so an ecosystem isn't defined by size, but instead by living and non-living factors living there. Okay, or being there, because non-living things don't live. A step up from there is a biome. And biomes are really cool. Hopefully you've watched the Intro to Ecology video as well already. And they talked about a lot of the different biomes on Earth. These are major regional or global communities that are typically characterized by two things. One, it's a shared climate. It's a climate that fits that area. So we're thinking temperature, we're thinking precipitation, the water, and how hot or cold it may be, the amount of water. If there's a lot, if there's a little, whatever. And then also the plant communities that thrive there. Biomes will share a lot of the same plants. Now, you won't find them all the way across these biomes because these biomes are in different parts of the world even. So sometimes plants are a little different, but by and large, those plants are the same. For example, the trees that we have here in the southeast, there may be some of them that are in the Pacific Northwest, but there's a lot of differences as well. Think about like these huge redwoods that grow out in the Pacific Northwest. We don't have any of those around here. Now, we may have some trees that are similar to it, but our plant communities are far different from theirs. But there may be some that are similar. Pine trees would grow in both places, right? A lot of our grasses would grow in the same places. If you like raising vegetables, you kind of understand biomes because some vegetables and plants that have fruits as well can't grow in certain areas. They need a certain climate, a certain temperature, amount of precipitation in order to thrive there. It's why you can grow oranges in Florida, but not in Michigan. Okay, so biomes are these major global communities. Now, in our notes, we're not going to talk about it, but the biosphere is kind of ecology on a worldwide scale. And as we, as humans, are able to travel around the world a whole lot easier nowadays, biospherical ecology is becoming more and more common because you can see how things on one part of the world really can affect other parts of the world. It can reach out beyond just their biome, their ecosystem. Especially things like pollution, right? It can affect the entire biosphere. Now, the biosphere also includes like the atmosphere above the earth as well. All right, so this ecological research, I want us to talk about 3 different ways that you can understand ecology, okay, or the interaction of living things with other living things and non-living things. One's observation. And we observe things all the time, right? If you're like me, I like people watching, all right? Before COVID, I like sitting around. If my wife went shopping, I'd just hang out at the mall and just kind of see people going by, and go, wow, there's a lot of different people in this world. And what am I really doing? I'm just carefully watching something over time. Now, my time period would be from, the food court down to JCPenney or something. But observing is just watching something to see what happens, right? To see how things interact, to see what kind of actions that living things will take. Now, some observations are very long-term studies. Some can be short-term studies. If we go back and look at Charles Darwin, say, from our last chapter, he did some short-term studies. When he was like on the Galapagos Islands, he wasn't there forever. Now, he was there for a couple years. So I guess depending on what your definition of long or short is. You could say you did one or the other, but I would say it's probably a short-term study. A long-term study may be something over 20 years, researching animals that come and go in a certain area of Yellowstone National Park. Okay, you're just watching. You're just kind of paying attention to what happens over time. There's something called a survey, and a survey can be used to monitor and observe populations. This can be like tagging, certain wildlife to see what happens to them over time, to see where they travel to. So some researchers may catch certain sharks or whales or some kind of aquatic life, tag them, put them back down, and then track them over time. Or just take account of, hey, we found this one here, and then you may have found it somewhere else if it's a group of researchers working together. Humans take surveys all the time, right? We can do them online even now. And it's just basically to monitor maybe your spending habits or your favorite sports teams, okay? Surveys just give us information about populations. It's kind of it's a form of observation. Sorry, I couldn't get that one out there. It's a form of observation. Another type of research method is experimentation. And experimentation with ecology, there's two different main ways. One's a lab experiment. This gives a researcher a lot of control, but the problem is you've taken some organism out of its natural setting, and it's hard to recreate all of the factors that can come into play in that natural setting. So yeah, you can kind of observe its behavior and see if it would change according to its diet, but you're taking out factors like climate. Think about animals at the zoo. They try their best, the zoos do, to recreate the ecosystem these animals are found in, but it's not the ideal thing to really observe this animal, to really see the interactions that this animal may have with all of the different components of what happens in wildlife. For example, we can't recreate what if there's a drought or a famine in a certain area. How would that change the migration or the movement patterns of a certain animal? We can't recreate that when we're giving them 3 square meals a day and a place to sleep. Field experiments is the other type of experimentation. Now, this can give us a more accurate picture, but it can be more difficult because of the numerous factors at work in nature. We may not account for certain things that the animal or the plant or whatever organism we're talking about interacts with. And we may not even be able to understand all of it because there's so many different things that can come into play. See, in the lab, you can control a lot of it. Field experiments, we start changing some things. It's hard to account for what all could change, if we introduced something or took something away, okay? And the last type of research method, especially now with technology the way it is, this is becoming more and more common and more advanced. It's called modeling. It's making models of what's going on in nature and using data that we've observed through observation or experimentation to make slight changes in the model and see how the model changes over time. Okay, so it's basically using a computer simulation, which is really helpful because we don't have to disrupt nature. We don't have to disrupt any type of natural setting. We don't have to pull an organism out or spend a bunch of money trying to be out there without disrupting anything and observe things. Instead, we can just use the information that we acquire to set up models, which is awesome. It enables us to see how one variable, if we change it slightly in some form or fashion, it could affect other things. In essence, we can create a virtual ecosystem, and that is amazing. Ecologists, this is a huge step for ecologists in the world today. Honestly, I think this is kind of where we're going now. Nothing beats, getting out in the field and really observing things. But once somebody does that, we can use that information to build models and see how things interact. We might still have to do some observation and experimentation, but modeling is certainly helpful, especially if money's tight or travel restrictions are in play or anything like that. So anyway, this is just a basic introduction to ecology. We're going to learn about some of the living things and non-living things later on. We're going to talk about some things like food chains and food webs over this week and next. So I hope you're looking forward to it. Ecology is one of my favorite things, certainly in the field of biology, mainly because I just love nature. Hopefully you will have appreciation for it too.